Good morning. They say good things come in small packages, so sorry some of you can't even see me probably. That's okay. Okay. Well, thank you, Suzanne, for being the inaugural speaker at the launch of the John Ruan III keynote address, which was fantastic. Indeed, John's vision and global legacy lives on through the World Food Prize laureates, the students who have participated in the Foundation's youth programs, and the Boardwalk Dialogue attendees, all of you, who have championed efforts to address global food security. Well, as part of our new C-Suite Connect series, yesterday, if you were able to attend, we heard from Chuck Magro of Corteva and Jackie Applegate of Bayer Crop Science, two dynamic leaders who shared their vision for the future and the role that innovation must play in harnessing change. Well, we continue that conversation today with two more change makers and visionaries as they focus on key elements of innovative insurance programs, risk reduction strategies, and opportunities for providing assistance to the next global generation of farmers. Please join me in welcoming to the stage the Executive Chairman and CEO of AgriSompo, Bob Haney, and the Director of FAO North America, Jocelyn Brown. Well, Mr. Haney is the Executive Chairman and CEO of AgriSompo, Sompo International's global crop insurance platform also, which provides crop insurance in the United States. Mr. Haney, a longtime veteran of the agriculture industry, has held both positions since December of 2020. Prior to joining AgriSompo, he spent 3 decades growing and leading crop insurance provider Rain and Hail, retiring from there as chairman in 2015. Well, Mr. Haney holds a Bachelor of Business Management degree from Eckerd University. Ms. Brown previously served as FAO representative for Ghana and as Deputy Regional Representative of FAO's Regional Office for Africa. But previous to that, she served at the U.S. Department of Agriculture as Deputy Administrator of the Foreign Agriculture Service for 23 years. I think that must be a record. Well, she holds a Master in Business Administration in International Business and Development from George Washington University. So please let us give a warm welcome to our two speakers this morning. Thank you.
Well, good morning, Bob. Nice to meet you. And yes. Good morning to everyone. We can't see you very well because of the lights, but hopefully you can see us. So, Bob, we're here to talk a little bit about risks and farmers. I think farmers probably have the riskiest job in the world. And so we're here to talk and get a little bit of insight from you about how to address that risk. I want to start off by repeating a message that has, I think, been echoed several times. I heard Secretary Vilsack talk about it on his keynote speech, as well as our Director General, Chu Dong-yu, mentioned it, but farmers are increasingly facing conflict, climate change crises, and increasing costs. And so there's a lot of pressures on farmers right now. In FAO, we have something that we call Agriculture is Humanitarian Assistance, where we are trying to get the message across that with rural people who are in crisis, whether they're in Ethiopia, Somalia, Afghanistan, Haiti, the Dry Corridor, or in the border of Bangladesh and Myanmar, that we need to supply agriculture inputs such as certified seed, fertilizer, and livestock drugs to those farmers at the same time that we're doing development assistance or humanitarian assistance. I want to pivot a little bit to your ideas around the world's attempt to produce food, feed, and fiber in our global community, and how you view crop insurance and the risks that the de-risking of crop insurance that it can bring, and what types of products do you see that can be brought to the table to help farmers reduce these incredible risks?
Yeah, I think if we go back and look at history, the word insurance was preceded by the word assurance. And from a farm policy perspective, Our country has always attempted to provide some level of assurance to the peoples of America, the ability to have a safe, cheap, affordable food supply. And so with the premise of having that assurance, it began to morph through a Blue Ribbon Commission in the late 70s, early 80s, to develop the ability for multiple aspects of society to lean on and support one another. Through that vehicle, the concept of insurance was evolved, and you wind up with really three types of manageable risk. One is the production of the food itself. One is the revenue component for the farmer. And of course, then you have the ability from a parametric perspective to perhaps even cover the entire aspect of farming for a given country. So there's really three layers there, if you will.
Got it. Great. The FAO is known for its reports. If you are not familiar in the audience with FAO's, we're a normative, we call it a normative body where we put out a lot of data and information. And we do an annual report on the state of food and nutrition security. Last year's report was about repurposing agriculture funds from governments to agriculture sectors, or commonly referred to as subsidies. According to FAO, my organization, we spend about $630 billion a year on subsidies, but they can be focused or they can come in the form of just seeds or inputs and not necessarily in other more sophisticated instruments. So I know, having worked at USDA before, I was actually there when we transferred over to the Freedom to Farm Act. Can you tell us a little bit about crop insurance in the US market and why it's been such a successful risk management scheme in the United States and how it could be used across the globe?
Sure, absolutely. And I think it's also important as we look back. Again, we always want to review history so that we don't repeat mistakes. But as we look back at the development of ag policy for the U.S., we want to be careful how those subsidies are used. We don't want to over-subsidize to where we create false markets or production in areas that are perhaps vulnerable from an environmental perspective, et cetera. So I think that also has to be part of the framework as we look forward. Now, from an insurance perspective, having a country subsidize the risk management of their farmers is really a three-legged stool. You have the taxpayer who, for providing their taxes for the subsidy in the form of some limited premium, they're securing for themselves the fact that the farmers can farm this year, produce the food, and if there's a natural disaster, they can farm the next year. From the farmer's perspective, in an insurance concept, the farmer has a deductible, and that deductible supports and assists the farmer in making good management practices, good decisions. Having skin in the game means something. And then in deploying the private sector, it has capital that can be utilized, and that capital also relieves pressure from the taxpayer as to bearing part of that burden. So from our perspective, that three-legged stool concept has worked in a very sound way. Our crop insurance model has become ag policy.
So if globally we're spending $630 billion on ag subsidies, and crop insurance does provide a scheme that involves the producer, the financial sector, and the taxpayer, what is keeping governments from supporting farmers through crop insurance schemes? I've spent some time in Ghana. I've also spent some time in Zimbabwe. And FAO we help governments support their policies. Talk to us a little bit about how we can encourage governments to adopt insurance schemes because of this three-legged stool that you talk about.
You know, in my view, it really boils down to cost. In today's world, everything is driven by cost, and there are limited dollars around the world. We are in a much better place financially than we've ever been as a globe, as a society. But there are still constraints around dollars. And once you get to that point, then politics come to play. And of course, being able to have ad hoc disaster payments or other forms of payments that are favorable for wherever that society may be, would detract from this three-legged stool concept. Having lived it and seen it within the U.S., I think the taxpayer gets a very high value for their dollar. I think the country is assuring itself of its food supply, and the private sector is, in all fairness, earning a fair rate for its deployment of capital. I think that is a solid foundation to set an ag policy around, of which if there are other aspects that as a society, a government wants to support or not support, then I think there are other places that can happen. But again, a word of caution, and we see it in the U.S. as well. We want to make sure that those dollars that are being subsidized are not creating bad habits. We want to make sure that they are focused where they need to be focused at. So got to have prudence when we set that policy.
So Bob, as we were getting to know each other a little bit, you talked about that you had served on a Blue Ribbon Commission on ag policy in the past, if I've got that term right, and we talked a little bit about the Freedom to Farm Act. So I want to dig a little bit deeper. Can you tell us, I mean, you've clearly had a history and an experience in this area. Can you help the audience understand a little bit more of how the crop insurance came about in USDA? And so for our global members in the audience who may not be familiar with the history, and you were at the center of it.
If I may, I'm going to, at a very high level, now the devil's always at all of the details, and there is a lot of history behind our ag policy, and a lot of great people have helped get us to where we're at today. But in the past, our farm programs were more geared toward production controls or production creation, paying farmers to plant, paying farmers not to plant. And you've heard the term now a couple of times, freedom to farm. In essence, Senator Roberts was the grandfather of plant it from fence row to fence row, if that's what you so desire. Plant what you want to plant, let the marketplace dictate those terms. And so it may be a bit of misconception around the world that there are production controls in place. To some degree, yes, that's still true, but overall the farmer can plant what they want to plant, and they're managing their risk by these government programs, one of those programs being crop insurance.
Oftentimes people look at agriculture, or farmers I think in particular, as somehow they're supposed to be producing out of the goodness of their hearts, and that they're not private sector entities. I've been in agriculture long enough where I've heard farmers spoken about as beneficiaries as opposed to investors, and I actually take issue with that because I feel like that really minimizes what the farmers are doing and the risks that they have. Given that they are private sector entities and that AgriSompo is a private sector entity, you're not out there, I mean, you are making a profit, right? And I'm not saying that you're not doing this out of the goodness of your heart, because I think there is a dual purpose here, but why are you committed to risk management in agriculture around the world, and what does AgriSompo get out of it?
Absolutely, that's a wonderful question, because you hit the nail on the head. There are two primary reasons that I came out of retirement to take this challenge on and to form these four companies into one called AgriSompo. Sure, capital needs a rate of return in order for it to be successful over time. But just as important, Sompo International as a whole believes in being a steward of our society, in being a complement to the rest of the world, in being able to provide food, fuel, and fiber. And that's what really excited me, coming back out of retirement to take on this project on an international basis, riding in multiple countries, to foster this concept of insurance, to foster this concept of farmers being accountable and responsible for themselves, using risk management tools, and at the same time providing that assurance to societies that we have a safe, stable food supply. It was meaningful to drag me out of retirement to do that.
It must have been if you came out of retirement, yeah.
Was.
Can you give us some examples of the countries where you've been successful? I think the audience would be really interested. I certainly would be interested.
France, Portugal, Spain, Rome, Italy, I'm sorry. I have Rome on the brain. I just come back from Rome. Italy, Brazil, just beginning to entertain the concepts of Mexico. We have some parametric and assumed business in the country of India. So we have ownership structures in those countries as well. And that's the exciting part, is it's more than just the U.S. piece. My prior company was international as well, but not to that depth. And so it's been quite the challenge to pull all the parts and pieces together.
And so you've been able to work with financial markets in those countries?
Yes, we have.
Because I would say a universal truth, if I may say from my 27 years, and you're welcome to correct me if you don't agree with me, a universal truth about farmers is that they have issues with access to credit, and they have issues with access to credit because they have issues to access to land and with land tenure. So I'm curious, in these different countries, you've been able to kind of crack that code in terms of addressing the financial markets.
We have, and it's really about being able to collateralize their operating loans. Every farmer each year, for the most part, there are a few that can self-fund. For the most part, most farmers have to receive loans, operating loans, for seed and fuel, fertilizer, equipment, et cetera. And crop insurance can be utilized as a collateral against that loan. And so we've set up structures to where assignments of an identity can be taken to where the farmer is assigning that proceeds in the event of a natural loss to the bank in order to help support and pay back that operating loan, which gives the farmer assurance that they can farm again the following year.
So, in your opinion, what is the most important aspect of providing assistance to the next generation of the world's farmers? I know you feel passionately about this, and so I'm going to let you give a little bit of time there to talk about this.
Yeah, this is the exciting part. Wherever education and agriculture intersects, it's always been a focus. It's always been important. And I spoke to the students this morning about the want to be successful. That was instilled in me not only early on in life from the family, but also in a series of mentors. And one of those mentors was my FFA teacher. And Joe McBenderman instilled in me that if we want to help support the world as a farmer, all we have to do is try. All we have to do is want to. And so it's been a very integral part of my past and our family's future as to looking forward into that next generation, supporting the education of that next generation, and having, if nothing else, fostering the concept of the students to ask, why do we do things a certain way? Mm-hmm. Why do we do it this way? Why do we use this type of chemical or that fertilizer? Is there a better way to do it? And that was the challenge that I addressed to the group this morning. Think out of the box. It's okay if you're wrong, but if you think out of the box, innovations will occur. The prior speaker before us talked about feeding the world. I'm confident that we can. As an ag community, I'm comfortable with the help of the next generation, we can feed the world.
And that's really important because of the number of youth that we have in countries that are agrarian-based and that need to see hope and opportunities there. There's been a number of students here at the Borlaug Dialogue. I think you spoke to some this morning. We certainly have had quite a few at our booth. Maybe, I think for students, and I have one who's just graduated from college as well, it's important for them to hear about journeys that people have taken. So I know we had a little bit of your resume up at the podium, but how did you go from wherever you were as a student at 20, 21, 22 years of age to a CEO of an insurance company? Help us a little bit. And what I keep telling my graduate is that it's not a linear path necessarily, that there's some zigs and zags in there. So help us understand what your journey was.
We actually spoke about that this morning. As a farm kid carrying seed to dad with a 2-row planter, we have come a long ways.
Where was your farm, Bob?
It was in Tennessee.
Okay.
And, today I sit in a in the cab of a tractor and I'm dropping 200,000 soybean seed an acre, 2.2 inches apart at 6 miles an hour. It is absolutely amazing. And I'm seeing every seed fall. It's like some of these movies you see on TV nowadays. But it's that kind of innovation and technology that if we use it smartly, it really helps to produce enough food to feed the world's population. How did I get here? Hard work, really simple. The insurance aspect was an accidental career. Never dreamt I'd be in the insurance world. But from a very early age, taught to simply outwork whomever stood beside me, to think about others at the same time, to help others along, to not only look forward, but to look back and not forget where you come from. So those life lessons meant something. At the time, I didn't quite realize that they meant something, but they do. And a little bit of luck goes a long way too. So that helped out.
You never know who you're going to meet along the way.
You never do.
Right, right. Bob, there's a lot of myths around crop insurance, and there's a lot of detractors out there. There's a lot of misinformation about crop insurance. Can you tell us from your position, where you are as CEO of AgriSompo, are there certain things that pieces of either misinformation or myths or misperceptions that you would like to clear up for the audience?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, we have to be realist. And if we look at the production of our food in the U.S. specifically, it has went vertical. It's been vertical integration as we move forward. I'm from a small family farm. It is a lifestyle that truly is who I am. Even to this day, I still farm. But if we look at it from a holistic perspective, trying to divide or segment family farm, small farm, new farmer from larger farms, corporate farms, it's all about in the aggregate, how do we safely produce our food that also at the same time protects our environment. And with that being said, I do believe that all farmers are the original conservationists. I, for one, do not want my soil washing away, and I do not want excess chemical or fertilizer that harms the environment. Absolutely not. It's inefficient, it's not practical, and to be frank with you, I have 3 little grandchildren that I want to have a safe environment for. And I think that's probably the biggest misconception, that farmers are, for the most part, they are trying to do it right.
Agreed. There's a great New Yorker cartoon with, my husband's a teacher, so this really resonated with me, but there's a great New Yorker cartoon with the teacher is sort of bent over with all of these things on her back in the cartoon of protecting the kids and teaching them and making sure they eat right and disciplining them and making sure that they, learn life lessons, and they're just sort of overwhelmed with the burdens of being a teacher. And I feel the same way of the farmer, that we're asking the farmer to grow our food, but we're asking it to do it in a, make sure it's nutritious food and make sure it's environmentally friendly and make sure it's cheap and make sure that it doesn't, there's biodiversity in the food. There's just so much pressure on the farmer. So let's take it back a little bit to crop insurance. You mentioned a little bit of, you touched on how it can be, could be a little bit of a moral hazard around crop insurance, that maybe farmers would use it and it promotes monocropping or things like that. How can we mitigate those? I mean, there's going to be disadvantages in every subsidy scheme. But how can we mitigate that particular one?
I think, again, there is always a role for our government, and that's where in development of these programs and these methods of subsidizing is we have to be very careful about where do we provide these subsidies and to what depth. We continue, in my opinion, in pushing out the production of our primary crop of corn into further and further away from the historical Midwest area out into the fringes. And again, hybridization is absolutely helping. It is allowing us to grow corn on, I'm going to call it less productive or with less water, if you will, as we move the corn region westward. But if we over-subsidize it, we over-advance that planting. We over-incentivize that advancement. So again, we need to be smart about it. We need to be careful about it. We need to think our way through that. And there's a lot of very, very bright people. I'm staring at a lot in this room right here that can help us tailor those programs to where we don't create that.
So somebody out here might be able to help us with this. If you have an idea about how to do corn insurance in the West, please come forward. How about insurance for horticultural products and specialty crops? I mean, that is an area that I don't know if you've thought about that at all. I know Brazil, that one of the countries that you've talked about, is a major producer of specialty crops, so cocoa and coffee. What is out there? What could we work with?
Absolutely, and there are products already available from a parametric perspective to where you can broaden the risk base to where it's not so expensive on, I'm going to call it micro farmers in areas of the world that need some type of protection. So I think those parametric type covers, which are irrelevant to the farm itself, it's really relative to a weather event that may or may not occur. Those types of programs are much, much cheaper and very containable from I'm going to call it a loss control perspective. They're sustainable over time. I've been watching the world's development of farm policy or ag policy for the last decade now, and I'm sensing more opportunity around the use of parametric than I ever have before.
And what about insurance for post-production? I think we talked about it a little bit backstage. A lot of people think about insurance as just on production, and maybe you could educate us all about how to do insurance, and once the produce is grown, what happens then? How can you insure that process post-production?
Sure. I mean, from a product liability perspective, from a production or processing perspective into the final stage of the food itself, all those types of risk, if you will, can be insured. There's no doubt about that. But I think the bigger aspect is from the revenue component, because at the end of the day, the farmer has applied X amount of dollars to that acre of crop, and they're looking for X amount of return. And there are products out there that would assure the farmer that there's some level of revenue that can be generated, regardless of whether Mother Nature cooperates or not. So a revenue product would be appropriate in those cases.
In FAO, we talk a lot about food loss and waste, because for those of you who are not familiar with some statistics around food loss and waste, if it's a little bit of an odd statistic, so bear with me here, but if food loss and waste were its own country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world. And in developing countries, it's mostly food loss. The harvest is poor or contaminated, or whatever happens, weather-related risks or whatever. And in developed world, it tends to be waste. And in fact, 40% of the waste is at the consumer level. So if I could just encourage everyone here to think about the food waste at home. Are there any insurance schemes that you can think of that address not necessarily waste, but food loss in countries? I've been in, for example, I've had experience in Kenya where it's so contaminated by aflatoxins. A wheat crop or a corn crop is so contaminated by aflatoxins that it's unusable. Are there insurance schemes that you think we could come up with, innovations to address farmers who may be looking at, his 10 hectares of corn that is completely contaminated with aflatoxin that could work?
Yes, there are products out there currently today that would address that. Again, it becomes an issue of scalability, and for smaller farms, micro farms, we'd have to think our way through the operational impacts of how you would deploy that on a scale large enough to where it would be supportable either by the government subsidies and or by the private sector. But yes, there are products that can do that.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. And my final question for you, Bob, is as you know, the United States is in the middle of, or hoping to be in the middle of negotiating its food security and agriculture policy, which is commonly referred to as the Farm Bill. Although, for everyone's knowledge, it's called something different every 5 years, but It's not always called the Farm Bill. It has a real title, but we generally call it the Farm Bill. Are there any hopes that you have? I'm sure you're watching it very closely because the crop insurance scheme is in there. Are there any hope? I think it's Title VI, maybe, of the crop. I have to admit, I haven't worked on the Farm Bill for 4.5 years, so I might be a little bit distant from it. Are there any hopes that you have for this coming Farm Bill?
Well, that's a loaded question.
Maybe take a piece of it.
I do think that ultimately we will get a Farm Bill. It is that important to rise above our political discourse. It is about providing the food, feed, and fiber that our country needs. I would truly encourage our congressional reps to put aside any and all differences and let's get a Farm Bill done. Do I expect it to get done soon? No. Do I expect it to have an extension? Yes. Do I expect it to get done in 24? I hope. Do I expect a lot of change? I do expect there might be a little bit increase in baseline. Where that baseline goes is truly being contested now across the aisles, so I don't know where that sets. I will say this, is that since 1980, the advent of crop insurance in U.S. ag policy has become the primary plank in support of the farmer. And it enjoys huge support from the farmers themselves. Do I expect a lot of change in Title 11 of the Crop Insurance Act? I don't. So all in all, I think it's relatively stable. We just have to, as a country, heal and come together and pass a farm bill that not only helps us produce the food, but also helps us take care of those that need the food.
Yeah, it's our food, it's our farm policy and our agriculture, and as an American citizen, I say as a UN employee, I'm hoping the best for the U.S. government on that side. We have 1 minute left. Bob, is there anything that you have not been able to mention that you would just like to, with all of your experience, share with the audience?
I would just simply encourage us all to continue to promote the next generation, to look forward and give those students the opportunity to ask the questions why. Will they get it right? I didn't. The first time, the second time maybe, the third time for sure. But support them, let them ask the questions, mentor them, teach them. Be that Joe McBenderman for somebody.
And be in agriculture. We need people to be involved in agriculture.
Absolutely.
And I think you're a testament of how we can, there's so many different aspects to it. It doesn't need necessarily to be production farming, although I understand you're still involved in it in Tennessee.
Still a farmer.
Well done. Well, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time, Bob, and I hope the audience has been able to take away some pearls of wisdom from you, and I really appreciate your thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.